There was an interesting back and forth between Cal and Jimmy. Now, this I find this to be a very interesting back and forth. Let me explain why. Um, Jimmy Dore is taking more of an outside politics view of this stuff. This idea of, look, if you say you're the Democratic Party and you say you represent these things, then you should represent these things. And if you don't represent these things, why am I backing you up? And he's argued that he supports lefties wherever they are. He doesn't necessarily kill the party and everything else. But to be honest, looking at his content over the course of a year or so, he seems to have gotten extremely caustic, for good reason, at the Democratic Party. And I would say somewhat, from my own assessment, cynical of change actually taking place within that party structure. That's what it seems like, anyway. Now, Cal has been working with the Justice Democrats. So right off the bat, this idea of giving up the party structure is out the window. He's accepted the party structure full bore, which is why he's working with Justice Democrats. But Kyle is but it's not that straightforward. It is, but it's kind of not. It's a bizarre thing. Cal will agree with much of what's being said with a caveat that he doesn't believe it's irreconcilable. Meaning, from his standpoint, we're boarding the ship. We're taking over the party. This is our party, and we're going to take it back, and we're going to take the soul, and we're going to put it back into the Democratic Party. This Herculean superhero type thing. This dramatic boarding of the ship. This the stuff that it evokes. So let's hear them two have a conversation. Both like each other, so it's a debate, but it's a low-level debate, but it's still a debate nonetheless. And they go back and forth on this point, and for the most part, they're arguing something that Nick Brana said. So, I'm not certain, but it seems like that was the inception of this, unless they just had planned to talk in general and the Nick Brana thing came up. But you must understand, from the standpoint of Cal, Nick Brana is doing something different. Nick Brana is trying to pull support away from the Democratic Party, and in sucking that support away from the party, put that energy into something else. Cal is trying to board the ship, which means he needs as many souls with him as he boards the ship. I'm skeptical on this board the ship stuff, especially if it's vote blue no matter who. But I don't necessarily know if it's vote blue no matter who, but we'll see. Let's let them have a conversation. I gotta be honest, I have a hard time disagreeing fully with Cal. I'll disagree with the points as it goes along. But Cal, conversation with Jimmy, debating Nick Brana's point about the failure of the Democratic Party and about this idea that progressives need to come up with a new strategy because the election was a damning failure. I mean, that's Nick Brana's point. Nick Brana is incentivized to take that point. Kyle is incentivized to take the counterpoint to that and find the roses among the manure. Let's let Kyle make his point against Brana. And Jimmy Dore is going to argue Brana's point, so I don't necessarily have to show Nick Brana. Let's flip and let it rock. Let it rock.
So, Nick Brana makes a point about, me, my strategy is I vote for progressive no matter where they are. If they're in the Democratic Party, Independent, Green, Republican, I would vote for a progressive. He brought up the point that of all the congressional candidates, we've only primaried two corporate Democrats, and that was Joe Crowley with Ocasio-Cortez and Ayanna Pressley, I forget who the name of the person, she primary. And so the idea, it looks to me, and maybe you can convince me otherwise, it looks to me that it's not happening, the takeover of the Democratic Party, and I think it's an unreformable party, I don't know what to do. If we're going to talk about strategy, I don't know what to do.
So this idea of unreformable, let me interject on this point. There's been changes. If I'm being honest, if I'm being very honest, while I am skeptical that the way this party is arranged right now, I mean, let's be honest. Healthcare for all is a tip of the spear. It was the number one thing. I've been looking at election polling results in regards to what people were talking about when they were coming out that election booth. The number one issue, healthcare, Medicare for all. The overwhelming majority of the people believe that that is a tip of the spear issue. That is like 70% of the public is on board for Medicare for all. $100 million Nancy Pelosi, she wants the big gavel, but she's out of sync with the American public, and she is dramatically out of sync with even her members of her own party. Expansion of Social Security benefits, $15 an hour minimum wage, all those things, these big, expansive issues. People have no clue what the Democratic Party stands for, with the exception of being relative to the Republican Party. But there were changes at one point. It wasn't always that way. I mean, after the Great Depression, you had these New Deal politics, and FDR himself saving capitalism because he believed that people were going to take it all. Even going to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was a change. I guess I'm making the point. Changes do happen within the political structure. It is not completely out of left field to believe that it could take place. It's just anytime you're in a particular situation, it seems almost impossible for the situation to change. It's like you would think the Soviet Union was going to be around forever, and oh my God, the Soviet Union fell apart. And this iconography of the Democratic Party that was there during FDR changed under Bill Clinton. Are we at a point where it changes to something else? Let's let them make their arguments. I just wanted to inject that point. Because I understand Dore on this one. And it's a different question of whether this particular Democratic Party will change. The question is, what are the movements that are yanking and tearing at it? And what are you willing to do? Meaning, are you willing to drain away support and let that party fail? And if not, then the impetus for the party to change lessens. This is not purely about begging the party to change. To some degree, this is also about being willing to hold them accountable and letting the ones that are not representing your interests fail. Let's keep going.
Chris Hedges talks about action in the streets and that kind of thing. And look what Bernie got done with outside of electoral politics with Amazon and Disney. That's a big deal. And I think that's the way we have to go going forward. Is not we can't rely on electoral politics.
Well, with Bernie and Ro Khanna, you're right that they were able to basically force Amazon through using shame and public pressure in order to force them to raise their minimum wage to $15 an hour. I do think it was the actual bill. I think that Bezos was scared that the actual bill might catch on because it did have a bipartisan framing in it, where I think he felt that Republicans might even sign on to it. So that did almost like shame him into making a change for the better. But I think you laid out a lot of important stuff that's correct, honestly, about the problem when you talk about, we got Pelosi, we got Feinstein, you lay out how your state is all Democratic, and then you don't see, the positive change, or at least not the change that you and I both want. But on Nick Brana's point, that's where I definitely have disagreement, because that fact that he throws out there is a little bit misleading, because what he's not doing is he's not taking into account the corporate Democrats who weren't already elected, but who were running. So he likes to say, they only unseated 2 corporate Democrats. What he's not telling you is that in 41% of the candidates who received an endorsement from either PCCC or Our Revolution or Justice Democrats or DSA, they actually won their primaries. So we basically took people who were going to be corporate Democrats and then knocked them out.
I could be wrong, But Nick Brana, if I'm not mistaken, was talking about the federal government. And it's not Nick Brana's job to make the argument for why people should be in the Democratic Party when he's trying to start a third party. His goal, his aim, is to browbeat and to show you're not going to get the changes that you want in that party. And if you do still want to stay in the Democratic Party, you're better off leaving the Democratic Party, even if you want to stay in the Democratic Party, because it gives them an impetus to change. As is, the model of you have nowhere else to go is still in effect. These guys are trying to board the ship and reinsole the Democratic Party. Now, it's possible it may work, but that's not Nick Brana's job to make the argument on your behalf. And I don't necessarily think it's all that disingenuous. I mean, ultimately, he's talking about federal government and who's been able to take over some of the seats in the federal government. What's inaccurate about that? Brana is right. Let's keep going. There are parts where I agree with Cal. This part is not one of them. Even though I know what he's getting, I understand what he's getting at. Let's keep going.
So I think that that's a very important data point that tells you more of the full picture.
I mean that's certainly an encouraging statistic. But you know, so is it your position? You think it is? You know, the reformation of the Democratic Party is in full swing, and it is something that can happen.
I would absolutely say we're in the process of doing it, and I think there's a lot of data to back that up. Now, it doesn't mean that I think that we've had, we get an A+ so far for how far we've come. But what I would say is we've come a very long way. So, for example,
to be fair to Cal, he's right. Like, from his standpoint, 2016, well, it's not just from his standpoint, from all of our standpoint, 2016 was only 2 years ago. In the short time of 2 short years, they've had to get this up and running and get these things going on. I'm trying to be very fair to him and make my assessment here, because I am less inclined to have a rosy picture that he has on the results of the midterm election, especially if Nancy Pelosi ends up with the main gavel. Because regardless, for all, the talk and everything else, at the end of the day, if Nancy Pelosi is the one who essentially is setting what it means to be a Democrat, she is going to ride that into the ground. I mean, you don't have this big, bold, expansive idea. She can't even say Medicare for all. Those people out there trying to browbeat her just to acknowledge science. Just to acknowledge science. The United Nations has come out with a hair on fire report. You must understand, these are conservative scientists writing these hair on fire reports of the world is coming to an end. You have 12 years. Now, I'm skeptical that the 12 years, I think the damage to some of this stuff is already baked into the cake. But they've given you a window. And with that window of 12 years, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and a group of children who are begging for their lives, because even though Nancy Pelosi is not going to be around during that time, they are. And you have to fight that hard to get the party to acknowledge something. Saying they believe in science as an asteroid that's going to hit the planet. And you have to fight so hard just to get them to acknowledge it. Yes, I'm more cynical on this. But I'll give Cal the benefit of the doubt. He's right. In 2 years, they've had to essentially build all of this up from the ground. So fair enough. Fair enough. I give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's keep going.
As a direct result of these exact groups that we're talking about and grassroots pressure, there were 4 elected officials in Washington, D.C. who openly did not take corporate PAC money. Now there's going to be over 40. So I think that's huge.